The neon sign outside Maggie's diner flickered weakly, casting a stuttering pink glow over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. It was a modest place, tucked just off Interstate 94 on the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan, where the hum of passing trucks mingled with the occasional honk of a car speeding toward the city. The diner's exterior was a patchwork of faded red paint and weathered aluminum siding, its windows fogged with condensation from the steaming coffee pots inside. A bell above the door jingled with every customer's arrival, and the checkered floor, though scrubbed daily, bore the scuffs of decades. Maggie's was no glamorous spot, but it was a haven for those who needed it, a warm meal, a kind word, or just a place to sit without judgment. Maggie Sullivan, all of 26 years old, stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp rag. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping to frame her freckled face. Her apron, once white, was now a canvas of grease stains and coffee splashes, tied tightly around her slim frame. She wore a faded blue dress beneath it, the hem frayed from years of wear, and sneakers so worn they barely cushioned her feet. Despite the long hours and the ache in her legs, Maggie's green eyes sparkled with a quiet warmth. She greeted every customer with a smile, even the ones who barely looked up from their plates. "Morning, Joe," she called to a grizzled trucker sliding into a booth. "Usual today?" Joe, a regular with a beard like steel wool, grunted and nodded. "2 eggs, sunny side, and a coffee, Maggie. You know me." She scribbled the order on her notepad, though she didn't need to. Joe had been coming to Maggie's diner since before she was born, back when her parents ran it. Now it was hers, inherited after a car accident took them both when she was just 18. The diner was all she had left of them, and she clung to it, like a life raft, even as the bills piled up and line of credit was overdrawn, and the roof needed repairs she couldn't afford. Still, Maggie kept the place running, pouring her heart into every plate she served. The morning rush was slow today, just a handful of regulars and a couple of travelers passing through. Maggie moved with practiced ease, flipping pancakes on the griddle, refilling coffee mugs and chatting with customers. "Cold out there today, huh?" she said to a woman in a worn coat, sliding a plate of bacon and eggs across the counter. The woman nodded, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug for warmth. Outside, the November air was sharp, the sky a dull gray that promised snow. Maggie's gaze drifted to the window, where she spotted a familiar figure limping toward the diner. Old Tom, as the locals called him, was a fixture here, as much a part of the landscape as the rusted gas station sign across the street. He was in his late 60s, his face weathered and lined, with a scruffy gray beard and eyes that seemed to carry a lifetime of stories. His coat was tattered, the brown fabric fraying at the cuffs, and he leaned heavily on a cane, his right leg dragging slightly. A faded backpack hung off one shoulder, stuffed with whatever he owned. Most folks ignored him, some crossed the street to avoid him, but Maggie always had a plate ready. The bell jingled as old Tom pushed through the door, his cane tapping the floor. He didn't say much, never did. He'd settle onto a stool at the far end of the counter, his head bowed, hands resting on his knees. Maggie didn't know his story. Nobody did. Some said he was a Vietnam vet, others that he'd lost everything in a bad deal. Whatever the truth, Maggie didn't care. He was a person, and that was enough. "Hey, Tom," she said, her voice soft but cheerful. "Missed you yesterday. You doing okay?" Old Tom looked up, his eyes tired but kind. "Just a rough day," he mumbled, his voice low and gravelly. "Didn't have the strength to walk over." Maggie frowned, her brow creasing. She glanced at the counter. Only one serving of hash browns and a sausage patty remained from the breakfast rush. She'd been saving it for herself, knowing lunch would be too busy to eat. But Tom's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his cane, and she didn't hesitate. She scooped the food onto a plate, added a slice of toast, and set it in front of him. "Here you go," she said. "Eat up." Tom looked at the plate, then at her. "This your lunch, Maggie?" His voice was quiet, almost guilty. She waved a hand. "I'll make more later. Don't worry about it." He shook his head, his eyes glistening for a moment before he ducked his head and started eating. The other customers didn't pay much attention, though a few cast sidelong glances. One man, a regular named Carl, leaned over from his booth. Maggie, why you always feeding that guy? He's just gonna keep coming back. Maggie's smile didn't falter. If I was out there cold and hungry, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. Carl snorted and went back to his coffee. Maggie didn't mind. She'd heard it all before. People saying Tom was lazy or dirty or just a nuisance. But she'd seen the way his hands shook, the way he never asked for anything, just sat quietly until she offered. That told her more about him than any gossip. The morning passed in a blur of orders and small talk. Maggie flipped burgers, poured coffee, and scrubbed the griddle between rushes. Old Tom ate slowly, savoring each bite, then pushed his plate back with a quiet, "Thank you, Maggie." He never stayed long, just long enough to eat and warm up before he limped back out into the cold, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. By noon, the diner was quiet again. Maggie was wiping down the counter when her friend Rosa, who ran the thrift shop next door, poked her head in. "Maggie, you got any of that pie left?" she asked, her voice bright. "Saved you a slice," Maggie replied, pulling a piece of apple pie from the case. "How's business?" Rosa sighed, sliding onto a stool. "Slow. People ain't buying secondhand coats when they can't afford food. You holding up okay?" Maggie shrugged, her smile a little forced. "Same as always. Bills are tight, but we're getting by." Rosa shook her head. "You're too good, Maggie. Always smiling, even when this place is bleeding you dry. Why, don't you sell it? Move somewhere new?" Maggie's hand paused on the counter. "This was my parents' dream. Can't just walk away from that." She glanced out the window, where old Tom was limping down the sidewalk. "Besides, folks around here need a place like this." Rosa laughed, but there was warmth in it. "You're a saint, Maggie Sullivan. Don't know how you do it." Maggie only smiled and handed Rosa her pie. But Rosa's words lingered. Daisha. Truth was, Maggie was tired. Tired of scraping by, tired of patching the roof with tarps, tired of choosing between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. But she couldn't let the diner go. It was more than a business. It was home. That afternoon, old Tom returned, right on schedule. The sun was high, the air still cold, and he settled into his usual spot at the counter's edge. Maggie was serving a plate of meatloaf to a couple of construction workers when she noticed him. His coat was thinner than it should be for November, and his cane wobbled as he sat. She scooped up a helping of mashed potatoes and gravy, added a slice of meatloaf, and carried it over. "Tom, you're gonna spoil me with all this sitting," she teased, setting the plate down. He looked up, his eyes softening. "You're too kind, Maggie. Don't deserve it. Everyone deserves it," she said firmly, then went back to the grill. The construction workers paid and left, their boots heavy on the floor. A few more customers trickled in. A trucker, a mom with 2 kids, a guy in a hoodie who barely spoke. Maggie moved through her routine, but her eyes kept drifting to old Tom. He ate slowly, like always, his head bowed. She wondered, not for the first time, what his life had been before. Had he had a family? A job? A home? She never asked. It didn't feel right to pry. Then, something unusual happened. A sleek black sedan pulled into the parking lot, its tinted windows catching the light. Maggie squinted through the window, wiping, her hands on her apron. The car was out of place here, too shiny, too expensive for this stretch of highway. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. His shoes gleamed and his watch caught the sunlight as he adjusted his cufflinks. He looked like he belonged downtown, not here among the cracked pavement and rusted signs. The bell jingled as he entered, his eyes scanning the diner. Maggie straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice warm but curious. "Welcome to Maggie's. What can I get you?" The man's gaze didn't meet hers at first. It settled on old Tom, who was still eating, his fork paused mid-bite. The man stared, his expression unreadable, then turned to Maggie. "Coffee black," he said, his voice clipped, "and a burger, medium, with fries." "Coming right up," Maggie said, jotting down the order. She glanced at old Tom, who had gone still, his eyes fixed on his plate. The man sat at a booth, near the window, his back straight, his hands folded on the table. He didn't look at the menu, didn't check his phone. He just watched old Tom, his eyes narrowing slightly like he was trying to place him. Maggie fried the burger, her mind turning. The man's presence felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She plated the food, set it in front of him, and said, "Here you go. Anything else I can get you?" He shook his head, his eyes flicking back to old Tom. "No, this is fine." He ate quickly, barely tasting the food, then stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and walked out. The sedan's engine purred as it pulled away, leaving Maggie staring after it. She turned to old Tom, who was pushing his empty plate away. "You know that guy?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Tom shook his head, his voice quieter than usual. "Never seen him." But his hands gripped his cane a little tighter, and Maggie didn't press. The next morning, Maggie was up before dawn, sweeping the diner's stoop as the first light crept over the horizon. The air was crisp, her breath visible as she scrubbed the counter and started the coffee pots. She kept glancing out the window, expecting to see old Tom's familiar limp, but the sidewalk stayed empty. By noon, her stomach twisted with worry. She stepped outside, scanning the street. No cane, no tattered coat. "Hey, Rosa," she called, spotting her friend unloading boxes at the thrift shop. "You seen old Tom today?" Rosa laughed, brushing her hands on her jeans. "That old guy? Probably wandered off to another corner. He's got no roots." Maggie didn't smile. She asked a kid selling bottled water nearby, then the mechanic across the street. Nobody had seen him. Her chest felt heavy as she returned to the diner, her eyes lingering on the empty stool where Tom usually sat. She served customers, flipped burgers, poured coffee, but her heart wasn't in it. The smell of frying onions, usually comforting, turned her stomach. That night, alone in her small apartment above the diner, Maggie sat on her worn couch holding an empty coffee mug. The apartment was sparse, a sagging bed, a second-hand dresser, a single lamp casting dim light. She stared at the mug, her mind on Tom. He never missed a day, not even in rain or snow. Something was wrong. She stood, opened the window, and looked out at the dark street. The cold bit at her skin and her eyes stung. She wasn't just worried, she was scared. The next day and the day after were the same. No Tom. Maggie's smiles grew forced, her movements mechanical. She kept the diner running, but her thoughts were elsewhere. On the fourth morning, as she sliced onions and started the grill, a black car pulled up, not the sedan from before, but another sleek vehicle. A man stepped out, tall and imposing, wearing a red cap and a tailored suit. He didn't smile, didn't greet her. He walked straight to the counter and handed her a brown envelope. Maggie blinked, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's this?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Read it," the man said, his tone flat. "Don't tell anyone." He turned, got back in the car, and drove off before she could respond. Maggie stood frozen, the envelope heavy in her hands. She looked around. Nobody was watching. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The words were typed, stark and simple. "Come to the Grandview Hotel, 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Her breath caught. The Grandview was downtown, a world away from her diner, a place of glass and marble where people like her didn't go. She read the note again, her heart pounding. Who sent this? Why her? She clutched the envelope, her eyes darting, to the empty stool where old Tom should have been. Something told her this wasn't random. Something big was coming. Maggie stood in front of her diner, the brown envelope clutched tightly in her hand. The November wind tugged at her coat, a second-hand wool thing she'd bought from Rosa's thrift shop for $5. The sky was heavy, with clouds, the air sharp with the promise of snow. She glanced at the faded sign above her, Maggie's Diner, the letters chipped but proud, and took a deep breath. The lock in her hand felt heavier than usual as she turned the key twice, securing the wooden door. "God, please go with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 94. She walked to the edge of the parking lot, her sneakers crunching on gravel, and flagged down a yellow taxi idling near the gas station. The driver, a middle-aged man with a tiger's cap pulled low, looked her up and down. "Where to, miss?" "Grandview Hotel downtown," Maggie said, sliding into the back seat. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the envelope on her lap. The driver raised an eyebrow but said nothing, pulling onto the highway with a lurch. As the taxi wove through Detroit's bustling streets, Maggie stared out the window. The city was a mix of grit and hope. Crumbling buildings stood shoulder to shoulder with new glass towers, their reflections glinting in the weak afternoon light. She passed familiar landmarks, the corner store where she bought her groceries, the park where kids played basketball despite the cold, the old factory with its broken windows. But her mind was elsewhere, tangled in questions. Who sent the note? Why the Grandview? And where was old Tom? The envelope felt like a weight in her hands. Its words burned into her memory. "Come to the Grandview Hotel, 4 Mile p.m. Don't tell anyone." From a friend. The taxi pulled up to the hotel just before 4 p.m. Maggie's breath caught as she stepped out. The Grandview was nothing like her world. Its glass facade soared into the sky, reflecting the city in shimmering panels. The entrance was flanked by polished brass pillars, and a red carpet stretched from the curb to the revolving doors. 2 security guards stood at attention, their uniforms crisp, one wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast day. Maggie felt small in her frayed coat and grease-stained sneakers, the envelope her only anchor. The guard with sunglasses stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Who are you here to see?" Maggie's mouth went dry. She fumbled with the envelope, pulling out the note. I got this letter," she said, her voice shaky. "It says to come here. My name's Maggie Sullivan, the Guard took the paper, scanned it, and handed it back with a nod. "Miss Sullivan, someone's waiting for you inside. Go on in." Before she could ask more, a man in a black suit emerged from the revolving doors. He was tall, his face stern, his movements precise. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice low. "Come with me, please." Maggie hesitated, her heart pounding. The guard gave her an encouraging nod, and she followed the man in the suit, sneakers squeaking on the marble floor of the lobby. The Grandview's interior was a world of opulence. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, their crystals catching the light. Plush velvet chairs lined the walls, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. Maggie felt like she'd stepped into a movie, every detail too perfect to be real. The man led her down a long hallway, its walls adorned with abstract paintings in gold frames. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving, clutching the envelope, like a lifeline. They stopped at a tall mahogany door, its surface gleaming under the soft lighting. The man turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Someone's waiting inside," he said. "You're safe. Just go in." Maggie swallowed hard, her hand hovering over the door handle. "Can I go in now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Detroit skyline. A polished conference table sat in the center, surrounded by leather chairs. And there, in the middle of the room, was a man in a wheelchair. Maggie froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Old Tom," she whispered, her hands trembling. But this wasn't the old Tom she knew. Gone was the tattered coat, the scruffy beard, the weary slump. His hair was neatly combed, silver strands catching the light. He wore a tailored white shirt with gold cufflinks, a navy tie, and a watch that gleamed on his wrist. The wheelchair was different too, sleek and modern, not the rickety thing he'd used outside her diner. His eyes, though, were the same. Deep, kind, and now sparkling with something she couldn't place. He smiled, slow and warm. "Maggie, come in." She couldn't move at first, her feet rooted to the floor. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the man before her. "Tom, is that really you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Yes, Maggie. he said, his voice steady and clear, no longer the gravelly mumble she knew. It's me. He gestured to a chair across from him. Please, sit. Maggie moved slowly, her eyes never leaving him. She sank into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't understand, she said. You're different. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. My name isn't Tom, it's Thomas Grayson. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm a businessman, Maggie. A billionaire, actually. Her mouth fell open, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. A billionaire, she whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. Thomas nodded, his expression serious but kind. I own companies, real estate, tech, manufacturing. I've built schools, hospitals, community centers. But wealth, it changes how people see you. They help you for what you have, not who you are. I wanted to see the world differently, to find people who help because it's right. Maggie's head spun. She thought of the man she'd fed every day, the one she'd given her last scraps to, the one she'd defended when others sneered. So you pretended? The cane, the coat, all of it? He nodded again. I've been doing this for years, Maggie. I go to different cities, live as someone who has nothing. I want to see who notices, who cares. Most people look away. You didn't. Her eyes stung, tears threatening to spill. I saw you were hungry. I didn't think. That's exactly why you're here, Thomas said, his voice gentle. You gave without expecting anything. You shared your last meal, smiled when you had no reason to. Every year, I choose a few people who show that kind of heart. I help them build better lives because people like you make the world better. Maggie shook her head, overwhelmed. But why me? I'm nobody. I just run a diner. You're not nobody, Thomas said firmly. You're Maggie Sullivan, and you have a heart most people lose along the way. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. I want to show you something. It's part of your reward. Maggie blinked, wiping at her eyes. My reward? He smiled, a glint of excitement in his expression. Yes. Follow me. She stood, her legs still unsteady, as Thomas wheeled toward the door. She noticed now that he moved with ease, his hands strong on the wheelchair's rims. The door opened, and the man in the black suit was waiting outside, joined by another. They nodded to Thomas, falling into step behind him. Maggie followed, her mind a whirlwind of questions. The hallway stretched on, the hotel's elegance still surreal. When they reached the lobby, Maggie's breath caught again. Outside, 5 black SUVs gleamed in the parking lot, their surfaces polished to a mirror shine. Men in suits stood beside, each one, their postures rigid, like a scene from a movie. Thomas glanced back at her, his smile widening. Come on, Maggie. She hesitated, then stepped into the lead SUV, sliding onto the leather seat beside Thomas. The door closed with a soft thud, and the convoy pulled out, moving smoothly through the city. Maggie's heart raced as she watched the streets pass by, familiar corners now strange from the tinted windows of this luxury vehicle. The other SUVs followed in a tight formation, their presence commanding attention. Pedestrians stared, but Maggie barely noticed. Her mind was on Thomas, on the note, on the impossible reality unfolding around her. Where are we going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll see, Thomas said, his tone warm but cryptic. It's not far. The drive took about 20 minutes, the city's chaos giving way to a quieter, newer district. The buildings here were sleek, with glass facades and manicured lawns. The convoy slowed, then stopped in front of a stunning structure that made Maggie's jaw drop. It wasn't a diner, not a shop. It was a restaurant, grand and modern, its glass windows stretching 2 stories high. The walls were smooth white stone, the entrance framed by sculpted topiaries and a fountain that sparkled in the fading light. A sign above the door read, Maggie's Kitchen, home of heartfelt meals. Maggie stared, her hands pressed against the car window. Is this real? She whispered. Thomas chuckled. Very real, and it's yours. Mine? Her voice, trembled as she turned to him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key ring, the keys glinting in the light. "Go inside," he said, handing them to her. "Take a look." Maggie's hand shook as she took the keys. She stepped out of the SUV, her sneakers feeling out of place on the pristine sidewalk. The guard stayed back, giving her space as she approached the entrance. The keys jangled in her hand as she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The interior was breathtaking. Polished hardwood floors stretched across the dining area, reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers shaped like cascading stars. Tables were set with crisp white linens, the chairs upholstered in deep blue velvet. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. She wandered further, her eyes wide. The kitchen was a chef's dream: stainless steel counters, top-of-the-line appliances, a walk-in freezer stocked with ingredients. Uniforms hung neatly on a rack, ready for a staff she didn't yet have. Maggie turned in a slow circle, her hand covering her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't care. "You did this? For me?" she asked, turning to Thomas, who had followed her inside. "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "You fed me when you had nothing, Maggie. You gave me kindness when others gave me scorn. This is your chance to build something extraordinary, to share that heart with the world." Maggie sank into one of the chairs, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't need to say anything," Thomas replied. "Your actions already did." Maggie stood in the center of Maggie's kitchen, the keys still clutched in her trembling hands. The restaurant's polished floors gleamed under the chandelier light, and the air held a faint scent of fresh herbs from the kitchen. Outside, the Detroit skyline glowed faintly against the darkening sky, a reminder of the world beyond. These pristine walls. Thomas Grayson sat in his wheelchair nearby, his expression calm but expectant, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the tattered coat Maggie had known him in. She turned to him, her eyes still wet with tears. "This is too much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do this." Thomas's smile was gentle, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You don't have to know everything right now, Maggie. You've got the heart for it. The rest will come." She shook her head, looking around at the gleaming tables, the velvet chairs, the kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "This isn't my world. I run a diner. I flip burgers, scrub counters. She gestured at the grandeur around her. "This is for people who know what they're doing." Thomas leaned forward, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. "You've been running a diner on a shoestring, keeping it alive through sheer will. You've fed people who couldn't pay, made them feel welcome when the world turned its back. That's not just flipping burgers, Maggie. That's leadership." "That's hard. This place?" He nodded toward the restaurant. "It's just a bigger stage for what you already do." Maggie wiped her eyes, her breath shaky. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of it all pressed down on her. The diner had been her parents' dream, a small, scrappy place where she could pour her love into every plate. This restaurant was something else entirely, a dream she hadn't dared to imagine. "What if I mess it up?" she asked, her voice small. "You won't," Thomas said firmly. "And you won't be alone. I've arranged for a team to help. You get started. Chefs, waitstaff, a manager. They're ready to work with you, not for you. This is your vision, Maggie. Make it what you want." She nodded slowly, the keys biting into her palm. "Okay," she said, more to herself than to him. "Okay." Thomas's smile widened. "There's one more thing I want to show you. Come with me." Maggie followed him through the restaurant, her sneakers silent on the hardwood. They moved past the dining area to a back office, its door marked with a simple brass plaque, "Maggie Sullivan, owner." Her breath caught at the sight of her name, etched in elegant script. Thomas pushed the door open, revealing a cozy room with a polished oak desk, a leather chair, and a window overlooking the city. On the desk sat a laptop, a stack of folders, and a framed photo of Maggie's diner, its neon sign glowing in the dusk. "I had that brought over," Thomas said, nodding at the photo. "A reminder of where you started. But this office is where You'll build what's next. Maggie ran her fingers over the plaque, then the photo. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind. Her mom's laugh as she served pie, her dad's gruff voice calling orders. This was their legacy, but it was her future. She turned to Thomas, her voice steady for the first time. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. You already have, he said. Every plate you gave me, every smile, that was payment enough. Now go make this place yours. The next morning, Maggie woke in her apartment above the diner, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding her. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream, the hotel, Thomas, the restaurant. But the keys on her nightstand were real, their weight reassuring. She dressed quickly, trading her grease-stained apron for a clean blouse and jeans, and headed downtown. The Grandview Hotel loomed in her memory, but Maggie's kitchen was her focus now. The restaurant was even, more stunning in the morning light, its glass windows catching the sun. Maggie unlocked the door and stepped inside, her heart pounding. The space was quiet, but it wouldn't be for long. Thomas had arranged for the staff to arrive at 10:01 a.m., giving her an hour to explore. She wandered through the dining area, trailing her fingers over the smooth tabletops, then stepped into the kitchen. The stainless steel gleamed, the appliances humming softly. She opened a fridge, finding it stocked with fresh produce, meats, and cheeses, ingredients she'd only dreamed of using at the diner. At 10:00, the staff arrived. There was Elena, the head chef, a woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile who'd worked in high-end restaurants across Chicago. Marcus, the manager, was a tall man with a clipboard and a knack for organization. The waitstaff, 4 young men and women with eager expressions, introduced themselves, their uniforms crisp and black. Maggie felt out of her depth, but their enthusiasm was infectious. Miss Sullivan, Elena said, tying on an apron. Mr. Grayson told us you're the heart of this place. What's your vision? Maggie hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of the diner, of the people who came not just for food, but for comfort. I want this to be a place where everyone feels welcome, she said. Not just the folks who can afford it. Good food, good company, no judgment. Elena nodded, a spark of respect in her eyes. We can do that. Let's start with a menu. The next few days were a whirlwind. Maggie worked with Elena to craft a menu that blended her diner roots with the restaurant's upscale potential. Classic comfort food, like meatloaf and mashed potatoes alongside dishes like herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetable risotto. Marcus handled logistics, setting up suppliers and scheduling staff. The waiters practiced their service, their smiles mirroring Maggie's own. She spent long hours in the office poring over the folders Thomas had left, business plans, budgets, marketing strategies. It was overwhelming, but she learned quickly, driven by a determination to prove Thomas right. The restaurant's grand opening was set for a week later. Maggie barely slept, her mind buzzing with details. She hung the photo of Maggie's diner on the office wall, a touchstone amid the chaos. Rosa stopped by one afternoon, her jaw dropping as she took in the space. Maggie, this is unreal, she said, running a hand over a velvet chair. You're gonna be famous. Maggie laughed, but it was strained. I just want to keep the lights on. Rosa squeezed her shoulder. You will. You've got something special here. The night before the opening, Maggie stood alone in the restaurant. The lights dimmed. She walked to the sign outside, Maggie's Kitchen, home of heartfelt meals, and traced the letters with her finger. Her reflection stared back from the glass, a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. She thought of old Tom, of the man she now knew as Thomas Grayson. His words echoed, "You've got the heart for it." She hoped he was right. The grand opening was a blur of activity. The dining room filled with curious locals, food critics, and a few of Thomas's associates, their suits standing out among the jeans and sweaters. Maggie moved between the kitchen and the dining area, greeting guests with her warm smile. The food was a hit. Elena's dishes were flawless, and Maggie's touches, like her mom's recipe for cornbread, brought smiles to every table. By the end of the night, the register was full, and the staff was buzzing with pride. Maggie sat in her office after closing, the photo of the diner glowing under the desk lamp. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The restaurant was hers, and it was working. But something nagged at her, a pull she couldn't ignore. She thought of the people she'd served at the diner, truckers, families, drifters like old Tom. Not everyone could afford to eat here, and that didn't sit right. The next morning, she called Marcus into her office. "I want to start something," she said, her voice firm. "A way to give back." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his clipboard in hand. "What do you have in mind?" "A food truck," Maggie said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "We'll take meals to the streets, shelters, bus stops, wherever people need them. Free food, no questions asked." Marcus nodded, jotting notes where that's ambitious but doable. "We'll need a truck, permits, supplies, whatever it takes," Maggie said. "This place is about more than profit. It's about people." Within a week, Maggie's Meals was born. Marcus sourced a used white van, and Maggie had it painted with the name Maggie's Meals, feeding the heart of Detroit. The first trip was small, just Maggie, Elena, and a volunteer waiter named Sam, driving to a shelter near the old factory district. They served hot soup, sandwiches, and cornbread to a line of people, their faces weathered but grateful. Maggie handed out plates, her smile as warm as it had been at the diner. "Thank you, miss," an older woman said, her hands wrapped around a steaming bowl. "Ain't had a meal like this in weeks." Maggie's throat tightened. "You're welcome. Come back tomorrow, okay?" As the weeks passed, Maggie's kitchen thrived. The restaurant drew crowds, its reputation spreading through word of mouth and glowing reviews. But Maggie's Meals became her true passion. Every evening, after the dinner rush, she joined the food truck, serving meals across the city. She saw faces she recognized from the diner, people who'd fallen on hard times, kids with worn shoes, veterans with tired eyes. Each plate she handed out felt like a promise. "You're not forgotten." One evening, as she served chili at a bus stop, a man approached her. He was thin, his coat patched, but his eyes were bright. "You're Maggie, right?" he said. "Heard about you. Folks say you're changing things around here." Maggie smiled, handing him a bowl. "Just doing what I can." He nodded, taking the food. "Keep it up. Means more than you know." Back at the restaurant, Maggie sat in her office, the city lights twinkling outside. She thought of Thomas, of the man who'd seen something in her she hadn't seen herself. She hadn't heard from him since that day at the hotel, but his presence lingered in every corner of Maggie's kitchen. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out the brown envelope, the note still inside. From a friend. She smiled, tucking it away. The restaurant was more than a business now. It was a beacon. Maggie hired more staff, many from the neighborhoods she served, giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. She kept the diner open too, hiring a manager to run it while she focused on the restaurant and the food truck. It was her way of honoring her parents, of keeping their dream alive while building her own. One night, as she locked up the restaurant, Marcus approached her. "Maggie, the truck's ready for tomorrow. We're hitting the east side, near the river." She nodded, adjusting her coat. "Good. Let's make sure we've got enough blankets, too. It's getting cold." Marcus hesitated, then said, "You know, I've worked for a lot of bosses. None like you. Why do you do this? You could just run the restaurant. Live easy." Maggie looked at the sign above the door, her name glowing in soft neon. "Kindness got me here," she said, touching her chest. "I have to give it back." Marcus nodded, a quiet respect in his eyes. As he walked away, Maggie looked up at the sky, the stars faint against the city's glow. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered, "for seeing me." She turned, climbed into the food truck, and drove off to prepare for the next day's route, her heart full, but steady. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. Winter settled over Detroit like a heavy blanket, the air sharp with frost and the streets dusted with snow. Maggie's kitchen stood as a beacon in the city's new district, its glass windows glowing warmly against the gray skyline. Inside, The restaurant buzzed with life, families celebrating birthdays, couples sharing quiet dinners, and business people sealing deals over plates of herb-crusted salmon and Maggie's signature cornbread. The chandeliers cast a soft light over the dining room, and the staff moved with practiced ease, their smiles reflecting the warmth Maggie had instilled from day one. Maggie Sullivan, now 27, stood at the edge of the dining area, watching it all unfold. Her auburn hair was neatly pulled back, and she wore a simple black dress, a far cry from the grease-stained apron of her diner days. But her green eyes still sparkled with the same kindness, and her smile remained a constant, even on the longest days. The restaurant had become a success beyond her wildest dreams, its reputation spreading far beyond Detroit. Food critics praised the blend of comfort and elegance, and locals spoke of Maggie's kitchen as a place where everyone felt at home. Yet, for Maggie, the true heart of her work lay outside these walls, in the streets where her food truck, Maggie's Meals, feeding the heart of Detroit, brought hope to those who needed it most. It was a late January evening, the sky dark and starless, when Maggie climbed into the food truck after the dinner rush. The van's heater hummed softly, cutting through the chill as she adjusted her scarf and checked the inventory. Sam, the waiter who'd become her right-hand man on these runs, was loading trays of hot soup and sandwiches into the back. Elena, the head chef, had stayed late to prepare extra batches of chili, knowing the cold would draw larger crowds. Maggie glanced at the side of the van, where the painted words gleamed under the streetlights. "Ready, Sam?" she called. "Ready, boss," he replied, slamming the back door shut. His grin was infectious, and Maggie couldn't help but smile back. They drove to the east side near the Detroit River, where the wind whipped off the water and bit through even the thickest coats. The area was a mix of abandoned warehouses and makeshift shelters, where people huddled against the cold. Maggie's Meals had become a regular sight here, and a small crowd was already waiting when the truck pulled up. Faces lit up as Maggie stepped out, her breath visible in the frigid air. She recognized many of them, regulars from her diner days, now joined by new faces, all drawn by the promise of a warm meal. "Hey, Miss Maggie," called an older man named Henry, his coat patched but his smile wide. "Got any of that cornbread? Tonight?" "Always," Maggie said, handing him a plate piled with chili and a thick slice of cornbread. "Stay warm, okay?" Henry nodded, his hands wrapping around the plate for warmth. "You're a blessing, girl. Don't know what we'd do without you." Maggie's throat tightened, but she kept moving, serving plate after plate. There were children in oversized jackets, their eyes bright with hunger, veterans with weathered faces, their gratitude quiet but profound, and families who'd fallen on hard times, their smiles hesitant but real. Sam worked beside her, chatting with the crowd, while Elena's chili warmed hands and hearts. Blankets, donated by local businesses Maggie had partnered with, were handed out to those without coats. Each interaction felt like a thread in a tapestry, weaving together the community she'd always dreamed of building. As the line dwindled, a young woman approached, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. She was new, her eyes wary but curious. "You're Maggie, right?" she asked, accepting a plate of soup. "People talk about you. Say you used to run a little diner." Maggie nodded, her smile soft. "Still do, in a way. Kept it open for the folks who need it." The woman studied her, then said, "Why do you do this? You've got that fancy place now. You don't have to be out here in the cold." Maggie paused, her hands stilling on the serving spoon. She thought of Thomas Grayson, of the man who'd seen her heart when she was just a diner girl scraping. "Vasi, someone gave me a chance when I had nothing," she said. "Kindness changed my life. I'm just passing it on." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "That's something special. Thank you." Maggie watched her walk away, the soup steaming in her hands. The words stayed with her, echoing Thomas's own. "You've got the heart for it." She hadn't seen him since that day at the Grandview Hotel, but his presence was everywhere. In the restaurant, the food truck, the faces of the people she served. She wondered where he was now, whether he was out there in another city, disguised as someone new, searching for another heart to lift. Back at Maggie's kitchen, the restaurant was quiet after the evening rush. Maggie sat in her office, the photo of Maggie's diner glowing under the desk lamp. The room had become her sanctuary, a place to reflect amid the chaos of her new life. The desk was cluttered with papers, schedules, invoices, plans for expanding Maggie's meals to other neighborhoods. She'd hired more staff, many from the communities she served, giving them jobs and a sense of purpose. The diner, still open under a new manager, remained a touchstone, a reminder of her roots. She visited it weekly, serving coffee and chatting, with regulars ensuring it stayed the haven her parents had built. Marcus, her manager, knocked on the doorframe. "Maggie, the truck's restocked for tomorrow. We're hitting the west side near the old train station. Got a new volunteer joining us." "Good," Maggie said, leaning back in her chair. "Make sure we've got extra soup. It's supposed to snow." Marcus nodded, then hesitated. "You know, the city's talking about you. They're calling Maggie's meals a game changer. Some folks from the mayor's office want to meet, talk about funding." Maggie raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Funding?" "Yeah," Marcus said, a grin tugging at his lips. "They think you're onto something big. Could mean more trucks, more routes." Maggie's heart swelled, but she kept her expression steady. "Let's keep it about the people, not the politics. We'll meet with them, but the food stays free." Marcus chuckled. "You're something else, Maggie Sullivan." After he left, Maggie pulled out the brown envelope from her desk drawer. The note was worn now, its edges soft from handling. "Come to the Grandview Hotel 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." She traced the words, her mind drifting to Thomas. She hadn't tried to find him. He'd made it clear his work was quiet, his identity fluid. But she hoped he knew what he'd started, how his gift had rippled outward, touching lives she'd never have reached from her diner. The next day, Maggie's meals rolled out again, this time to a lot near the old train station. Snow fell in soft flakes, blanketing the city in white. The crowd was larger than usual, drawn by the cold and the promise of warmth. Maggie moved through the line, her scarf dusted with snow, her hands steady as she served. A boy, no older than 10, tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Maggie, can I have some for my mom? She's sick, can't come out." Maggie knelt, handing him an extra container of soup and a blanket. "You tell her to get better, okay? And come back tomorrow if you need more." The boy nodded, his eyes bright. "Thanks, Miss Maggie." As she stood, a familiar face caught her eye. Rosa, her friend from the thrift shop, was leaning against the truck, a thermos of coffee in her hands. "Thought you might need a warm-up," Rosa said, handing it over. Maggie took it gratefully, the heat seeping through her gloves. "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." "Wanted to see the famous Maggie's meals in action," Rosa said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "You're doing something real here, Maggie. Makes me wish I'd done more with my shop." "You do plenty," Maggie said. "Those coats you give away keep people warm. That's not nothing." Rosa smiled, but it was tinged with something wistful. "Maybe, but you're changing lives. Makes me think about what's possible." Maggie squeezed her friend's arm. "Come with us next time. We could use you." Rosa laughed. "Deal, but you're buying the coffee." As the weeks turned to months, Maggie's meals grew. A second truck joined the fleet, funded by donations from local businesses and a grant from the city. Maggie trained new volunteers, many of whom had once stood in her lines, their faces now lit with purpose. The restaurant thrived, its profits supporting the food trucks and new initiatives, a scholarship fund for local kids, a job training program for the unemployed. Maggie's Kitchen became more than a restaurant. It was a movement, a testament to what kindness could build. One spring morning, as the snow melted and the city bloomed with new life, Maggie received a letter. It arrived at the restaurant, a plain white envelope with no return address. Her heart skipped as she opened it, recognizing the handwriting from months ago. The note was short. "Maggie, I'm proud of you. Keep shining. A friend." She stood in her office, the letter trembling in her hands. It was Thomas, she was sure of it. She looked at the photo of Maggie's diner on her desk, then out the window at the city she'd grown to love even more. Her life had changed, but her heart hadn't. She still saw the faces of those she served, old Tom, Henry, the boy with the sick mother, and knew this was her calling. That evening, Maggie joined the food truck for its usual route. The air was warm now, the streets alive with people. She served plates of grilled chicken and cornbread, her smile as bright as ever. A woman approached, her face familiar from the diner days. "Maggie Sullivan," she said, her voice warm. "You're the talk of the town," Maggie laughed, handing her a plate. "Just doing what I love," the woman shook her head. "No, you're doing more than that. You're giving us hope." As the truck drove back to the restaurant, Maggie sat in the passenger seat, the city lights blurring past. She thought of her parents, of the diner, of Thomas Grayson. Kindness had brought her here, and she'd spend the rest of her life sending it back out into the world. She looked up at the sky, the stars faint but steady. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered, "for everything." The story of Maggie Sullivan spread beyond Detroit, a tale of a woman who turned a small act of kindness into a legacy. Maggie's kitchen and Maggie's meals became symbols of what was possible when one person chose to care. And somewhere, in another city under another disguise, Thomas Grayson smiled, knowing he'd found the right heart to change the world. This story teaches us that kindness is never wasted. A single act, given freely, can spark a chain of good that transforms lives. Maggie's journey shows us that no matter how little we have, giving from the heart can lead to rewards we never imagined. What did this story teach you? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going.